Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video, we're going to refactor our code. Refactoring helps us write clean, efficient, and scalable code. It's not only about making our code look nice, but it also helps us keep our code base structured and easy to manage. Let's get started. So here in our post form, let's improve the code in our handle submit to deal with duplication. So whether we're selecting a post or creating a new post, we are collecting the name, description, and the author in both. Let's create one variable to collect the data for both the selected post and the created post, and we're going to call it post data. And in that, we're going to store the properties for both the selected post and the created post. So for the ID, we're going to use conditional rendering. So if it's a selected post, we're going to use the form data ID. And if it's not a selected post, then it's a newly created post. And we are going to use nano ID to generate a new ID. So with this post data variable, we can go ahead and delete this if-then statement. Instead of having two dispatch statements, we can just have the one. And again, we can use conditional rendering. If it's a selected post, then we're going to use the update post thunk here, and we're going to be dispatching its action. Otherwise, we're going to dispatch the action for creating a new post using the thunk. So we can remove this dispatch. So just that improvement shortens the code. The rest of this stays the same. We can shorten this even further. We can keep here the ID property. That's going to be different based on whether it's a selected post or created post. But as for the other variables, we can spread these out using the spread operator and just refer to the form data, and that handles the rest of the properties. So now let's deal with errors locally, and specifically, let's deal with form validation and handle any errors that occur from missing data. And here in the handle submit again, we're going to add a new variable, and it's going to be called const is form valid. And we are going to include all the form variables for which we're collecting data. So form data description and form data author. And since we're going to be using that outside of the handle submit, we're going to move it up to below the use selector. And here in the handle submit, we're going to use this form is form valid. And we're going to use that variable here. If is form valid is not true, that means that the form fields are empty, we're going to return. So we don't want to simply return. We actually want to send a message to the user on the front end. So what we want to do is return a message if the form fields are empty. And we're going to create the variable for that. In local state, we're going to create local state for a message. So const, and we're going to call it form message, and then set form message. And initially, we're going to set state to be empty. And so if the user does not fill out the form and leaves some of the fields empty, we want to return. But we also want to set the message. Set form message. All fields are required. Now, before we actually click submit, we want to make sure that set form message is blank. So if for any reason we need to reset the forms. We want this message to start off as empty. And where is that message going to be placed? Well, it's going to be placed below the form. We want to notify the user of the error. So if the user forgets to complete a field, we want to notify them. And here we're going to include the form message. And right now we don't have any CSS for that, but I'm going to be creating a CSS using the class name fail. So let's close this out. I'm going to just go back over and we have our CSS here. Create a style for fail. The color is going to be red. And while we're here, we may as well create another one for success, and that's going to be color green. So let's save that, and we need to start SASS. There we go. So let's head back over to our post form. Here we are. And now we know that if a user forgets to fill out one of the fields, they're going to get a message here. So let's test this out and make sure it's working on the front end. So let's just try and submit this with no fields completed and see what message we get. All fields are required. Very good. So it's working. Now let's head back over to our code. So let's move to status and error properties from the Redux store and see how we can use this information on the front end. Let's take a look at the loading status. If the status of our request is still loading, that means that the request is being sent to the database. We want to disable this button. And that's because we don't want the user to try and submit multiple requests at the same time. So let's update the button to include the condition that the button is disabled if the status is loading. That means if the data is still being sent to the database, we want to disable the button. So here in the button, we're going to add a property, disabled. And if this condition is true, if status is loading, then disabled equals true, if this is true. Okay, so let's save that and we're going to test that out on the front end. Okay, so let's create a post, new post description, new post author. And when we click create, we should see this button disable while this post is being sent to the database server. So let's check, and it's not working. So let's go back over to our code and see what happened. When we click the button, if status is loading, then the button should be disabled. That code is correct. Now let's just move up here. All right, so here in the handle submit, we have post data, and if it's a selected post, then we're going to pass over the form ID. Otherwise, we're going to create a new ID. So post data can be either a selected post or a new post. Whether we're dispatching the action for the update post thunk or the action of the create post thunk, we're passing over post data. And with those updates, let's try again. New post description, new post author. It was brief, but it did disable the button for a second. So let's try it again. New post 2003, new author 2003. Now just watch the button. It disabled briefly because it only took a few seconds to send that data to the database. Okay, so now let's see if the update post thunk is working. Using our post data, we're going to name this new post 2025, new post description 2025, and new post author 2025. And watch the button, and it was successfully submitted. So now let's see if we can update it. Edit. We're going to change this to 2024, new post description 2024, and new post author 2024. And when we see it on the front end, that post has been updated. Let's go ahead and delete it. So now we know that the update post functionality is working. Now, while we're at it, let's just update the button itself. So for example, if we're creating a new post, we can change this button to say something like submitting. So let's head back over to the code and go down to the button. So here on the button, currently we're saying if it's a selected post, then we want the button to display update. But if it's a newly created post, we want it to say created. So now we're going to add a new condition that if the status is loading, then we want the button to display the text submitting. Otherwise, everything else stays the same. If it's loading, we want the button to say submitting. Otherwise, we want the button to continue to say what we had before. If it's a selected post, we want it to display update. And if it's a newly created button, we want it to display create. Okay, so now we can go back over to the front end. Let's save this first. Let's go back over and let's try this out. Let's create a new post. We're going to say new post 2024, post description and author 2024. And let's see if this button says submitting. Okay, it's working. So now let's head back over to the code and work on our next task. So what about if the status is succeeded? If that's the case, we want to display an updated message below the button. So for starts, let's make this code look a little nicer. We're going to do Alt-Shift-F. That makes the code look much nicer and is easier to manage. So here, below the form, we want to create a message if the status is succeeded. So right below the code, here we have our failed message and we have an error message from the server. So right below that, if the status or the response coming back from the server is succeeded, then here we're going to display a message. Let's create a div here. I'm going to give it a class name of fail. No, this one's success. We're going to say the post blank successfully. So either the post was updated or the post was created successfully. And how do we create that message? We're going to use conditional rendering. So if it was a selected post, then we want it to say post updated successfully. Otherwise, if it were created, then we want to say created, the selected post. Now, along with that, if the status is successful, we also want to reset the form, and we can do that within the handle submit below the post data. Let's go back up here. If the status is successful, we want to reset the form, and we can do that within the handle submit. The best way to do that is with the unwrap method. Now, the unwrap method is a function from Redux Toolkit, and it lets you unwrap the results of a promise from the async thunk, making it easier to access the results directly in your code. So since unwrap is used with the async operation, we need to use async and await to handle the promise it returns. So here in the handle submit, we're going to add async, and we're going to also include a try catch block right after the post data. Try catch. Here we're going to catch error. And we're going to add unwrap right at the end of this dispatch, because we want to know if this dispatch was successful or not when we submitted the form. So we added async here at the top, and right before dispatch, we're going to add await. And we're using await with dispatch because we want to wait for the results of the asynchronous action before proceeding to the next part of the code. And so if this dispatch was successful, we want to set a form message stating that was successfully submitted. And now that we've got that guarantee from the server that it was successfully submitted, we can go ahead and reset the form. And we want this message to display briefly. So we're going to set a timeout. And after 2 minutes, we want this code to follow new instruction. The new instruction is to set the form message to blank and also set the form data. All the form data properties, the ID, we want those also to be reset if the form was successfully submitted. And the last one is author. And then if the post is new, we want to stay on the page because possibly the user may want to submit another post. So we don't want to move away from that page if it's a newly created post. However, if it's a post that's being edited, it's a selected post, then we want to navigate to the home page. Now this catch statement is catching errors thrown by the unwrap method, and reject with values is handling the errors. And remember that reject with errors, it includes a fallback error message that covers errors with the form submission. So this is sufficient, what we have here. We don't need to create another local state for errors because it's going to be covered with the reject with values that we already have in state. We don't need to set another redundant local error message that deals with errors for this try catch block. Let's save this. So let's go back and take a look at the errors that we're displaying below the form. So let's see how we can combine this a little bit. We've got a failed message. This is local. Whenever we see status as a response from the server. So maybe what we can do here is keep all the failed messages together. So we're saying if the status is failed, there's an issue on the server, then we want the server message to show. The failure message from the server. Otherwise, if it's not from the server, let's say there's a local issue with the form, then we want this message to display. Okay, so if the response back from the server is failed, then we're going to display the message from the server. Otherwise, it's going to be a response from local state. Now dealing with the success, I think this pretty much looks good. If the response from the server was that it succeeded, then we are going to display either the post was updated or the post was created successfully. So now let's save all of this and let's test it out on the front end. Let's delete these. I just want one. Let's create a new post. New post, post description, new post author. Successfully submitted. Okay, and it's red, so it shouldn't be red. And this continues to stay even though we've already successfully submitted it. So let's go over and fix this. The only thing we need to add here, this is going to take care of an issue on the front end. So if the user forgot to fill out some of the form fields, then we want to say if is form valid, then So this is basically saying if the form is not valid, then we want to show this specific message. So here, if the status from the server was succeeded, then we also want, instead of this, we want this also to be a form message saying that the form had successfully submitted. And the benefit from it is that the message disappears after 2 minutes, as opposed to the other message we had here. It did not disappear after a certain time. It just stayed on the form. So let's save this and see what this looks like on the front end. Let's go back and let's just remove a couple of these so we can see it in action. Now, if it's a new post description, a new post author that we're creating, successfully submitted, and it disappears after 2 minutes. Let's also check here. Now, why isn't this disappearing? New post description, and new author. Let's see what we forgot to do. We should be clearing ID, name, and description. Okay, so let's go back over. And I also want to see if this button is working, and it should be. There we go. So let's go with new post 2023. New post 2000. I don't know why I keep saying 2023. I don't know why I'm obsessed with 2023, but new post 2023 here. Let's hit create. It said submit rather briefly, and then we got the message briefly. So everything is working. And let's go back over to our code, and the code, it has been refactored. And we got our messages displaying at the bottom. We have a more condensed code here, and the handle submit, and everything looks great. So let's save that. We save that, and let's do one final prettier reformat. That's going to be Alt-Shift-F, and everything looks great. So let's just save this, and that's going to bring our lesson on refactoring to a close. If you found value in this tutorial so far, don't forget to like and share this video. Also, subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell button. If you want to be the first to know, connect to the Hub, Source Coder Hub's community. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.